In the vast, windswept plains of Wyoming, a homeless veteran and his loyal dog stumbled upon a forgotten mobile home, hoping for a second chance. But a land beneath their feet held a secret that would unravel a decades-old conspiracy. Liam Cole gripped the steering wheel of his aging pickup truck, his knuckles white from the strain of 8 hours on desolate roads. The engine groaned as if protesting the endless journey, while the radio offered nothing but static, a hollow soundtrack to his thoughts. Beside him, Ranger, a sturdy German shepherd with eyes that held too much wisdom, paced restlessly on the passenger seat, his ears twitching at every gust of wind. They had been driving since dawn, leaving behind a life of shattered memories and sleepless nights. Liam's duffel bag in the back contained all he owned, a few changes of clothes, a worn photo, and the heavy weight of regret. The landscape outside was a vast, dust-blown plain of sagebrush and dormant hills under a huge, empty sky. This was Wyoming's remote corner, a place where towns were dots on a map and silence was the only constant. Liam had bought this patch of land, a barren 5-acre plot near a place called Dusty Gulch, from an old man who described it as cheap and quiet. Those words echoed in his mind as he navigated the rutted driveway, the truck bouncing over rocks and dried mud. He needed quiet. He needed a place where the past couldn't find him. As the sun began its descent, painting the horizon in shades of orange and purple, the mobile home came into view. It was a dented aluminum box perched on a concrete foundation, its roof patched with tin, and its porch sagging like a tired sigh. Weeds clawed at the sides, and the windows were clouded with dust. To anyone else, it might have looked like a ruin, but to Liam, it was a sanctuary. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt like a blanket, heavy but comforting. Ranger whined softly, his tail brushing against the cracked leather seat. "Yeah, boy," Liam muttered, his voice rough from disuse. "Home sweet home." He stepped out into the dry wind, his boots crunching on gravel. The air carried the scent of sage and distant rain, a promise that never quite materialized. Ranger leaped down and immediately began sniffing the ground, his body tense with curiosity. Liam took a slow walk around the property, his eyes tracing the boundaries. The land was flat and sparse, with a few stubborn shrubs and a dry creek bed that cut to the back like a scar. In the distance, the hills rose, dark and imposing against a fading light. This was his now, a place to start over, to build something from nothing. Inside, the trailer was even smaller than he'd expected. The ceiling bowed in the middle, and the floor creaked under his weight. The air smelled of metal and mildew, a familiar scent of abandonment. He dropped his duffel on a faded couch, sending a cloud of dust into the air. The remnants of another life were everywhere. A chipped coffee mug on the counter, a calendar from 2007 frozen in time. Liam felt like an intruder, stepping into someone else's unfinished story. He spent the next hour unpacking what little he had, setting up a makeshift bed in the corner. Ranger explored every nook, his nose working overtime as if deciphering the history of the place. As night fell, Liam lit a propane lantern, casting a warm glow that fought back the darkness. He sat on the steps outside, a tin cup of instant coffee in hand, and watched the stars emerge sharp, cold points of light in the sky untouched by city glow. Ranger settled at his feet, his head on his paws, eyes reflecting the lantern's flame. For the first time in years, Liam didn't feel the urge to drown his thoughts in drink. The silence here was different, not empty, but waiting. He thought about his time in the service, the friends he'd lost, the orders he'd followed without question. He thought of Alex, who'd always believed in rebuilding. "Guess I'm doing it, Alex," he whispered to the wind. "Starting over." But as the moon rose, pale and patient, Ranger suddenly stood up, his ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest, directed toward the back of the property, where the dry creek bed lay. Liam followed his look, but saw nothing, just shadows dancing in the breeze. Yet Ranger's stance was unmistakable. Something out there caught his attention, something that didn't belong. Liam felt a chill, as if the land itself was watching them back. As Ranger's growl deepened into a warning, Liam knew this wasn't just about a fresh start. The land had a story to tell, and it was ready to be heard. What hidden truth lay buried in the dust, and why did it feel so familiar? As the sun rose over the Wyoming plains, Liam Cole faced his first morning in his new home, but his dog's uneasy behavior hinted that the peace he sought was already being disturbed by secrets buried just beneath the surface. At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another bond speaks louder than words. Dawn found Ranger already pacing near the trench, tail low and body tense. Liam woke to the soft creak of the floorboards as he stood, rubbing the stiffness from his knees. The trailer was silent, except for the constant hum of the wind outside. He moved to the small window above the sink. The sky was turning from deep purple to a soft gray. Ranger was focused on the dry creek bed at the back of the land, his posture unmistakably alert. It was the same spot that had caught his attention the night before. Liam stepped outside, the wooden boards of the porch groaning under his boots. The air was crisp and carried the scent of sage. Ranger trotted over to him, nudged his leg, and turned back toward the trench with a soft whine. "What is it, boy?" Liam asked, his voice rough with sleep. Ranger led him to the edge of property where the ground dropped into a shallow, winding hollow. Kneeling, Liam ran his hand over the soil. It was dry and cracked on the surface, but beneath the top layer, the dirt felt softer, almost moist. He frowned, tracing the contour of the trench. It wasn't random. It had a deliberate shape, curving gently and disappearing behind a cluster of sagebrush. It reminded him of drainage lines he'd seen in deserts half a world away. Ranger began pawing at the edge of the trench, scattering dust and revealing fragments of something buried. Liam leaned closer, brushing away the loose soil. His fingers closed around a piece of corroded metal, smooth and rounded with a threaded rim. It felt industrial, like part of a pipe joint. A familiar pull tightened in his chest, a ghost from his past life in the military, where he'd worked on field repairs for water systems. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, but this piece of metal brought them rushing back. He pocketed the fragment and stood, dusting off his jeans. "We'll look later," he said to Ranger, but the dog didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, his muscles taut. The morning sun climbed higher, and the heat began to settle on Liam's back. He scanned the wide open spaces. This land was supposed to be his escape, but now it felt like it was holding on to memories of its own. Later that day, Liam drove into the nearest town, Dusty Gulch, for supplies. The hardware store was a small, weathered building on Main Street. The clerk, a woman named Brenda with sun-weathered skin, helped him gather what he needed. When he mentioned his property off County Road 12, her expression shifted. "That's the old dry gulch lot, isn't it?" she said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Haven't heard of anyone moving out there in years." Liam nodded, explaining he'd bought it from an old-timer named Harris. Brenda paused, her hand stilling on the counter. "You might want to steer clear of the back section," she advised, her tone dropping. "Army logistics yard. Contamination scare in the 80s. Folks here call it a cover-up." She shrugged, bagging his items. All that's left now is dust and bad memories. On the drive back, Liam replayed her words in his mind. A logistics yard, water lines, fuel. It all aligned with what he'd found in the trench. When he arrived home, the evening light was turning gold. Ranger was waiting at the same spot, standing guard as if he hadn't moved all day. Liam knelt beside him, running a hand through his fur. "You smell something, don't you?" he murmured. Ranger's ears twitched, and he let out a low, uneasy sound. Liam followed the trench's path again, this time with purpose. He moved the sagebrush aside and found where the ground dipped more steeply. There were faint rectangular impressions half buried in the dirt. Foundations, perhaps. He scraped at the surface with his boot and uncovered a fragment of poured concrete, its edge beveled like old military construction. Standing there, with the cool evening air against his skin, memories flickered, disjointed images of work crews and uniform pipes laid under foreign soil. He recalled men joking about building water systems for ghosts, a phrase he hadn't thought of in years. Ranger nudged his leg, pulling him back to the present. Liam looked around at the wide-open hills and the endless sky, and for the first time since arriving, he felt like the land was watching him back, holding secrets he was only beginning to uncover. As Liam stared at the concrete fragment, he knew this was more than just abandoned debris. It was a piece of a puzzle tied to his past, and with Ranger senses on high alert, the truth was slowly rising from the dust, ready to challenge everything he thought he knew about his new beginning. Just as Liam began unraveling the property's mysteries, an uninvited visitor arrived with a proposition that seemed too good to be true, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The morning after his trip to town, Liam woke with the woman's words echoing in his mind. Dust and bad memories. He stood at the window, watching Ranger patrol the perimeter. The dog had barely left the trench area, and Liam found himself drawn there too, his military-trained mind piecing together fragments of what might lie beneath. He was examining the concrete foundation more closely when the sound of an approaching vehicle broke the silence. Ranger's had snapped up, a low growl rumbling in his chest as a white SUV, too clean, too new for these dirt roads, pulled up to the gate. A man in his mid-40s stepped out, wearing a suit jacket over jeans and mirrored sunglasses that hid his eyes. His smile was practiced, professional, and didn't quite reach his mouth. "Mr. Cole," the man called out, his voice smooth and confident. "I'm David Miller with Evergrowth Development. Mind if I have a moment of your time?" Liam approached slowly, Ranger sticking close to his side. "What can I do for you?" Miller opened his briefcase with a crisp snap. "We're developing a solar energy project across this region, and your property falls within our planned expansion zone." He handed Liam a glossy folder filled with renderings of solar panels stretching across pristine landscapes. "We're offering very generous buyouts to landowners. Yours will be significantly above market value." Liam flipped through the pages, his eyes catching on the amount listed on the preliminary check. It was more money than he'd seen in years, enough to pay off debts, start fresh somewhere else. But something fell off. The offer was too generous for this barren patch of land. "Why here?" Liam asked, keeping his voice neutral. "There's miles of open land south of the highway. Our geotechnical surveys identified this tract," Miller said smoothly, his smile never wavering. "It's about efficiency, Mr. Cole." Liam noticed how the man's eyes kept darting to Ranger, who hadn't relaxed his guarded stance. He also noticed the dust on Miller's shoes. Darker clay, not from this soil. It came from the south, where the old logistics yard had been. "I'll think about it," Liam said, closing the folder. "Of course," Miller replied, though his tone suggested the matter was already decided. "We'll be in touch." As he turned to leave, Ranger emitted another low growl, deeper this time. Miller paused momentarily, then climbed into his SUV and drove away, the dust hanging in the air long after he'd gone. Back inside the trailer, Liam dropped the folder on the table. The pages smelled faintly of fresh ink and something chemical. He turned on his old laptop, waiting for the sluggish internet connection to load. The Evergrowth website looked professional, full of clean energy promises and sustainability talk. A quick search confirmed it. Evergrowth was a subsidiary of Corwin Industries, the same Corwin he'd welded for. The pieces clicked into place with the force of a hammer. Corwin Industries had been one of the main contractors on the Quartermaster Corps projects he'd worked on, the same projects that involved water containment systems. They'd faced lawsuits decades ago for groundwater contamination, but all cases had been dismissed or sealed under national security clauses. Evergrowth was their new face, a fresh name on an old machine. They weren't here for solar energy. They were covering their tracks. If they acquired the land, they could excavate quietly, remove evidence, and rezone the area, erasing any link to military contamination. Liam looked at Ranger, who had settled near his boots. "They're not here for the sun, are they, boy?" The dog blinked slowly, as if understanding the pattern. Liam picked up the folder, tore the check in half, and watched the pieces flutter into the trash. Then he returned to his laptop, searching for environmental records, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he connected dates and names. Everything lined up 1989, the same year as a containment project incident. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Every document ended with the same notation. Remediation classified under Section 41B Federal Operations. Buried under paperwork, just like the land itself. As Liam uncovered the connection between the developer and his past, Ranger suddenly stiffened, growling at something outside the window. Headlights were approaching through the darkness. Someone was coming back, and they weren't taking no for an answer. The midnight intrusion left no doubt. Liam's refusal to sell had made him a target, and the evidence left behind was both a warning and a piece of the puzzle he couldn't ignore. The SUV's taillights vanished into the night, but the tension they left behind lingered like a storm cloud. Liam double-checked the locks on the trailer door and windows, a habit from his service days he'd hoped to leave behind. Ranger paced restlessly, his nails clicking on the thin linoleum floor. He'd periodically stop, ears swiveling, listening to sounds too faint for human ears. The Wyoming night was never truly silent, but tonight, its usual chorus of crickets and distant coyotes felt menacing. Liam finally fell into a fitful sleep on the narrow bed, only to be jolted awake hours later by the sharp snap of a twig outside, followed by the faint scrape of metal on metal. He was on his feet in an instant, his heart hammering against his ribs. Ranger was already at the door, a deep, continuous growl rumbling from his chest, the fur along his spine standing straight up. "Easy, boy," Liam whispered, grabbing the heavy flashlight from his bedside table. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds. The moon cast long, distorted shadows, but he saw no movement. The yard was still. He waited, his breath fogging the cool glass, every sense screaming that they were not alone. After 5 minutes of unbearable silence, he slowly cracked the door open, the flashlight beam cutting a swath through the darkness. He scanned the porch, the yard, the silhouette of his truck. Nothing. He stepped out, Ranger pressed against his leg. The air was cold, and the wind had picked up, moaning through the cracks in the trailer's siding. A thorough patrol of the perimeter revealed nothing out of place. He began to wonder if the sound had been the wind playing tricks on an old, tired structure. It wasn't until the first light of dawn tinged the sky that he found the proof. As he went to fetch water from the truck, he saw them, fresh, gleaming scratches around the keyhole of the trailer's front door lock. Someone had tried to pick it. His blood ran cold. He pushed the door open and froze. The interior was in disarray. The small table was overturned. His duffel bag had been emptied on the floor, and the cabinet doors hung open. They had been searching for something. A quick inventory revealed that the Evergrow folder and the copies of the old maps from the county records were gone. But as he righted the table, his foot knocked against a crumpled stack of papers that had been shoved halfway under the couch. They weren't his. He smoothed them out on the now upright table, his hands trembling with a mixture of rage and dread. They were grainy satellite photographs, printed on matte paper, with official-looking markings along the edges. The first few showed the valley in its earlier years, green and vibrant. The next series, dated in the late 1980s, showed the construction of the containment site, a massive, circular structure ringed with equipment and temporary shelters. But one photo, stamped June 1989, made his breath catch. It showed a cluster of tents and makeshift structures just beyond the project's boundary, labeled Zone 3B, Displacement Support. He flipped to the next image, his stomach churning. The area that had once held the tents was gone, replaced by a dark, spreading stain emanating from the containment wall. The official caption was chilling. Post-incident area cleared due to hazard risk. Zone 3B, Displacement Support. Post-incident area cleared. The sterile words hit a brutal truth. They hadn't just sealed a leak. They'd buried a camp. Fragmented memories surged. The heat, the dust, the desperate faces of civilians, the hurried orders to seal the lines. No questions asked. A soft whine brought him back. Ranger was licking at a raw, shallow cut on his side, hidden in his fur. It wasn't deep, but it was deliberate. The intruders hadn't just been searching. They had wanted to send a message. They could hurt what he cared about. The scattered photos weren't an oversight. They were a threat, a way of saying, "We know what you're digging for, and we know how to bury you with it." As Liam tended to Ranger's wound, a new determination solidified within him. The break-in wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a fight. The photos were not just a warning. They were a weapon, and he now knew exactly who he was up against. In the chilling quiet after break-in, Liam knew that silence was no longer an option. He had to trust someone with the truth, even if it meant stepping out of the shadows and into a fight that could cost him everything. The cut on Ranger's side was a stark, red line against his dark fur, a deliberate mark that made Liam's hands clench. He cleaned the wound with practiced care, his mind racing. The intruders hadn't just been searching. They'd left a message with those photos, a twisted show of power meant to intimidate him. But as he looked at Ranger's trusting eyes, Liam felt a cold resolve harden within him. He wouldn't be scared off. He waited until the sun was fully up, then scrolled through his old contacts and found the name. Sarah Jenkins, an investigative reporter for the Wyoming Tribune. They'd met years ago when she was covering veteran affairs. He took a deep breath and dialed. "Sarah, I'm in trouble. I've stumbled onto something big, a military cover-up from the 80s, contaminated land, and now threats. They broke into my place last night." There was a pause, then the sound of a keyboard. "Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." For the next 20 minutes, Liam laid it out. The property, the pipe, the trench, Evergrowth's offer, the break-in, and the damning photos. When he described the displacement support zone and its disappearance, her tone shifted. "Liam, if this is true, it's not just a story, it's a reckoning. Those photos indicate a potential loss of life. Can you send them to me?" "I will, but I need you to see this in person. There's more here, the pipe, the trench. It's all connected." "I'll be there by noon," she said without hesitation. "Don't talk to anyone else. And be careful. If Corwin Industries is involved, they play for keeps." After hanging up, Liam secured the evidence, hiding the original photos in a waterproof case under the trailer floor and making digital backups. Ranger stayed close, his wound healing, but his demeanor wary. Sarah arrived just before noon in a dusty sedan. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Ranger allowed her to stroke his head, a sign of trust that reassured Liam. "Show me," she said, pulling out a notebook and camera. Liam led her to the trench. He pointed out the pipe, the concrete fragments, and the drainage line. Sarah took photos from every angle, her questions precise and technical. Back inside, Liam showed her the digital copies of the satellite images. She zoomed in on the displacement camp, her expression darkening. "This is Zone 3B, and it's just gone in the next image? No records." "None that I can find," Liam said. "The official line is hazard risk. But I think the explosion contaminated their water supply, and sealing the pipes cut them off completely." Sarah nodded slowly. "I've heard whispers about Corwin for years. Lawsuits buried, witnesses silenced. This could unlock it all. But Liam, once I publish, there's no going back. They'll come after you hard." "I'm not backing down," he said. "Those people deserve better." She spent another hour interviewing him, digging into his memories of the 1989 project. He shared fragments he'd buried for decades. The heat, the dust, the rushed welding jobs, the vague unease. "I'll have a draft ready by tomorrow evening," she said as she left. "It'll run in the weekend edition. Stay vigilant." After she drove off, the silence felt heavier, charged with anticipation. Liam walked the perimeter with Ranger, his eyes scanning the horizon. As dusk settled, Ranger's sudden growl cut through the quiet. A dark sedan was parked just beyond the property line, a lone figure visible behind the wheel, watching, waiting. The game was now in the open. The dark sedan didn't move, but its presence was a clear threat, a silent warning that Liam was being watched, and that his decision to go public had just escalated the conflict into open war. Liam stood frozen in the doorway, his hand resting on Ranger's back, feeling the low, continuous growl vibrating through the dog's body. The sedan was parked about 100 yards down the road, just beyond his property line. Its windows were tinted, but the silhouette of the driver was unmistakable, motionless, watching. Liam's military instincts kicked in, assessing the situation. This wasn't a covert observation. This was a show of force, designed to unnerve him. He made a decision. He wouldn't hide in the trailer, waiting for them to make the next move. "Stay here, boy," he commanded firmly, though he left the door slightly ajar so Ranger could follow if needed. He walked deliberately toward the gate, his boots crunching on the gravel, his posture straight and unyielding. He stopped at the fence line, crossing his arms, and stared directly at the vehicle. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the driver's door opened. A man in a dark jacket stepped out, followed by another from the passenger side. They were both broad-shouldered, moving with the casual confidence of people used to intimidation. They didn't approach the fence, but leaned against their car, mirroring his stare. "Can I help you?" Liam called out, his voice cutting through the evening quiet. The driver, a man with a shaved head and a thick neck, offered a thin smile. "Just doing a site assessment, Mr. Cole. It's a nice piece of land. A real shame if something were to lower its value." The threat was veiled but clear. Liam didn't flinch. "I think you've done enough. The break-in, the photos, I know who you work for." The passenger, younger with a nervous tick in his jaw, shifted his weight. "We're just consultants. Due diligence." "Consultants who know my name?" Liam countered, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Tell Cohen the story is already with the press. Trying to scare me off is a waste of your time." The driver's smile vanished. "The press has a short memory. So do people, especially veterans with complicated histories. Everyone has a price, Cole, or a breaking point." The words hung in the air, a direct threat to dig up dirt on him or worse. At that moment, Ranger let out a sharp, loud bark on the porch, his presence a clear warning. The two men glanced at the dog, then back at Liam. "This is a professional courtesy," the driver said, his voice low and cold. "Walk away. Take the money, or the next visit won't be a conversation." With that, they got back into the sedan. The engine roared to life, and the car executed a slow, deliberate U-turn before speeding off down the dusty road, leaving a cloud of sediment in its wake. Liam stood his ground until the taillights disappeared, his heart pounding. The confrontation had been brief, but it had changed everything. The shadow war was now out in the open. He walked back to the trailer, his mind racing. They knew about the reporter. They were threatening to ruin his reputation. Inside, he found Ranger standing guard at the window. Liam knelt and wrapped his arms around the dog. "It's you and me, buddy," he whispered. "We knew this wouldn't be easy." He immediately started moving a heavy cabinet in front of the door, not as a foolproof barrier, but as an early warning system. He checked his supplies and kept his heavy flashlight and a hunting knife within reach. Sleep was out of question. He sat at the table with the lights off, watching the moonlit landscape, Ranger at his feet. Every distant sound seemed amplified. He thought about the men in the sedan, the cold efficiency of their threats. They were professionals, likely private security hired by Corwin. This was a calculated operation for them, but for Liam, it was deeply personal. As the first hints of dawn tinged the sky, a new resolve settled over him. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. He had started this journey seeking solitude and peace, but he had found a purpose instead. The rising sun revealed fresh tire tracks near his gate, proof that the sedan had returned during the night. But as Liam examined them, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Article is live. Check your email. The storm is here." The article hit the digital world like a lightning strike, and within hours, Liam's quiet corner of Wyoming was thrust into a raging storm of public scrutiny, official denial, and unexpected alliances. Liam's phone buzzed with a link from Sarah. He clicked it, his hand slightly unsteady. The headline was bold and uncompromising. "Veteran uncovers buried tragedy. Decades-old military cover-up surfaces in Wyoming dust." Sarah's byline stood beneath it. The article was a masterpiece of investigative journalism, meticulously detailing the QMC-79 project. The explosion, the seal pipes, the displacement camp, and Corwin Industries' continued efforts to silence the truth, including the break-in and intimidation. It featured quotes from Liam, the satellite photos, and even referenced a suspiciously generous buyout offer from Evergrowth. For a few heartbeats, there was only the sound of the wind outside. Then his phone began to ring. First, a number he didn't recognize. Then another, and another. He let them go to voicemail. Emails started popping up on his laptop. Requests for interviews, statements, comments. He saw his name trending on regional social media channels. The story, as Sarah had promised, was spreading like wildfire. By mid-morning, the first news van appeared, a satellite dish mounted on its roof. It was followed by two more. The distant murmur of reporters gathered at his gate. Liam stayed inside, watching the circus unfold from his window. Ranger paced nervously, unsettled by the commotion. Then came the official response. A press release from Corwin Industries landed in his inbox, CC'd to what seemed like every major news outlet. It dismissed the article as a reckless conspiracy theory built on the fabrications of a troubled, disgruntled veteran. The words troubled and disgruntled were clearly chosen to undermine his credibility. They admitted the existence of the minor, long-remediated infrastructure project, but flatly denied any knowledge of a displacement camp or a cover-up, attributing the satellite images to a misinterpretation of temporary construction shelters. Liam felt a hot spike of anger at the corporate lies, but it was quickly tempered by a new development. His phone rang with a number from the state capitol. It was a senator's office, requesting a call. Then, an email arrived from the Environmental Protection Agency, stating they were reviewing the claims with the utmost seriousness. The facade was cracking. The most meaningful contact, however, came from a man named Frank Weber. His email was simple. I was there in '89. QMC 79. I have information. Call me. With Sarah's help, Liam verified the man was indeed a former welder on the project. When Liam called, Frank's voice was gruff with age and emotion. They ordered us to weld the emergency vents shut, Frank said without preamble. It wasn't an accident. It was a calculated risk. The supervisor said, the order comes from God and Corwin, and you don't question either. Frank's account corroborated Liam's darkest suspicions. The explosion wasn't an accident. It was a calculated risk that went catastrophically wrong, and the sealing of the site was a deliberate act of containment, not remediation. Empowered by this new testimony, Sarah published a follow-up piece that afternoon. The pressure mounted. By evening, the county sheriff, under the glare of the cameras, officially announced he was reopening the investigation into the 1989 Dry Gulch incident. Liam watched the sheriff's statement on a live stream, a surreal feeling washing over him. The secret he had uncovered was no longer his alone. It belonged to the world. But as the sun set, the dark sedan returned, parking farther down the road this time. A silent reminder that while the battle was being won in the public eye, the war was far from over. As Liam finally allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction, Ranger's head snapped toward the back of the property, a new, urgent growl in his throat. The dog was staring not at the road, but at the dark trench, where the first drops of a gathering rain had begun to fall, hinting that the land itself was about to deliver the final, undeniable proof. The heavens opened with a fury that seemed almost biblical, as if the sky itself had decided to wash away 30 years of lies, and in the torrential downpour, the earth began to surrender its buried truth. The rain didn't just fall, it assaulted the land. Great, heavy drops hammered against the trailer's tin roof, a deafening drumbeat that drowned out all other sound. Within minutes, the dry, cracked soil of Liam's property turned to a slick, churning mud. Rivers of brown water carved new paths through the dust, seeking the lowest ground, the trench. Liam stood at the window, watching the spectacle. Ranger whined softly beside him, unnerved by the violence of the storm. Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard in stark, white bursts. In one brilliant flare, Liam saw it. Water was pooling in the trench, but not just pooling, it was bubbling, churning from below as if the ground itself was boiling. He knew what it meant. The sealed pipe, still connected to a pressurized system somewhere upstream, had become a ticking time bomb. The swelling clay and rushing surface water were exerting immense pressure on the old weld. The land was doing the digging he couldn't. Shoving his feet into his boots and grabbing a raincoat, Liam ran outside, Ranger close at his heels. The wind-driven rain stung his face. He slogged the mud to the edge of the trench, his flashlight beam cutting a shaky path through the downpour. The water was now a raging torrent, tearing at the edges of the gully. He focused on the welded cap. As he watched, a long, jagged crack appeared along the seam. Then, with a deep, subterranean groan that he felt in his bones, the seam gave way. The seam shrieked, then burst. A geyser of water, roaring, furious, exploded into the air. It wasn't the muddy surface water. It was clearer, welling up from the depths, carried with the faint metallic scent of rust and something older, something buried. The force of the eruption toward the edges of the trench, widening it, pulling more earth and history into the open. Liam stumbled back, shielding his face from the spray, his heart pounding with a mix of terror and awe. He was witnessing nature reclaiming what men had tried to silence. Ranger barked furiously, circling the torrent, instinctively wary of the raw power on display. The unleashed water carved a new channel, rushing down the slope with unstoppable force toward a barren basin where the old reservoir had stood. Liam, compelled by a need to see, to document, fought his way through the storm, following the path of the flood. He arrived at the edge of the basin just as the rushing current began to fill it. The water pooled, swirling and digging, washing over cracked, lifeless earth. And then the impossible happened. As the current undercut the edges of the basin, a large, dark shape broke free from the mud and rolled over with a heavy, grinding sound. It was a slab of concrete. Then another and another. The flood was exhuming the grave. Liam waded closer, his boots sinking deep into the softening ground. He shone his light on the nearest slab. There, stenciled in faded but unmistakable paint, were the letters and numbers. QMC 79, the mark of his old unit. The proof was no longer a fragment in his pocket or a line in a ledger. It was a monumental, physical reality laid bare by the storm. He stood there, soaked and shivering, watching as the evidence of everything they had buried rose back into view. The rain drummed on, washing the dirt from the concrete, making the markings clearer with every passing second. The land had spoken, and its voice was a roar. As Liam took out his camera to document the uncovered slabs, Ranger's bark turned from warning to alarm. The beam of his flashlight caught a figure standing on a ridge above the basin. David Miller, the man from Evergrowth. His suit was a muddy ruin, his face a mass of rain and rage. The race to control the truth had now moved into the open, under the storm's relentless eye. Standing between the exposed truth and the man who wanted to bury it again, Liam faced a confrontation in the raging storm where more than just a pass was at stake. David Miller stood on the ridge, silhouetted against the frequent lightning flashes, his suit soaked and hair plastered to his forehead. The professional smirk was gone, replaced by a snarl of pure rage. He half slid, half ran down the muddy slope toward Liam, his shoes sinking into the muck. "You!" Miller yelled, his voice barely audible over the storm and the roaring water. "You stubborn fool! Do you have any idea what you've done?" Liam stood his ground in front of the exposed concrete slabs, Ranger positioning himself slightly ahead, a deep, continuous growl rumbling from his chest. The geyser from the broken pipe continued to spray into the air, a monument to the failure of Miller's secrecy. "I've uncovered what you and your company tried to hide," Liam shouted back. "It's over, Miller. The whole world knows." "It's never over." Miller splashed to a stop a dozen feet away, his eyes wild. "We can still contain this. We can spin this. An environmental remediation, a memorial. We'll write the check. But this—" He gestured violently at the rising water and the exposed slabs. "This is a disaster. For you," Liam countered. "Not for the people who died here. Not for the truth." Miller's composure shattered completely. "The truth is what we say it is." He took a threatening step forward. "You're just one man, a broken veteran living in a tin can. You think anyone will care about you in a week? You'll be forgotten, and this will be a solar farm." As he spoke, he took another step, now within striking distance. Ranger's growl intensified. The dog's body coiled like a spring. Miller ignored him, his focus entirely on Liam. "I'm not going to let you ruin decades of work," Miller hissed, and he lunged. It was a clumsy, desperate grab, not a skilled attack. Liam easily sidestepped, using Miller's own momentum to shove him past. Miller stumbled, splashing face first into the churning, knee-deep water. He came up sputtering, fury etched on his features. He scrambled to his feet and charged again, more wild and off-balance than before. This time, Ranger moved. With a powerful leap, the dog inserted himself between Liam and Miller, not biting but standing firm, his bark sharp and commanding, a clear, physical barrier. Miller pulled up short, suddenly aware of the 90 pounds of protective muscle and teeth. The standoff lasted only seconds, but was broken by a new sound. The distinct wail of sirens. Not just one, but several. Red and blue lights pierced the rain and gloom, reflecting off the rising waters. Sheriff's Department SUVs and two unmarked sedans skidded to a halt on the ridge above, doors flying open. Miller froze, his face draining of color as federal agents in jackets emblazoned with EPA and DOI began making their way down the slope alongside the county sheriff. The authorities had not just believed the story. They had come to see the evidence for themselves. The sheriff approached Liam first, his eyes wide as he took in the scene. The geyser, the flood, the stenciled concrete slabs rising from the mud like tombstones. He then turned to Miller. "David Miller," the sheriff said, his voice loud and official. "I think you'd better come with us. We have a lot of questions for you and ever growth. And I suspect the federal folks do, too." As an EPA agent read him his rights, Miller was led away, shooting one last, venomous look at Liam. But the fight had gone out of him. The land itself had testified against him. Liam stood, catching his breath, the adrenaline slowly receding. Ranger leaned against his leg, his job done. An EPA official approached, introducing herself as Dr. Reyes. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice filled with a mix of professional awe and gravity. "We've seen the articles. But this is undeniable. You've done something incredible here." Liam looked at the churning water, at the exposed truth, and then down at Ranger. He hadn't felt incredible. He felt exhausted, hollowed out, but finally clean. As the federal team began cordoning off the area, Dr. Reyes turned back to Liam, her expression turning serious. "The legal battle is just beginning. They have teams of lawyers who will attack your credibility, your past, your sanity. Be ready." In the wake of the storm and Miller's arrest, Liam found himself at the center of a media firestorm and a legal battle that would determine whether truth could truly bring justice, or the powerful would still find a way to bury it. The morning after the storm, Liam's property was transformed into a frenetic hub of activity. The floodwaters had receded, leaving behind a landscape scoured clean in some places and buried in mud in others. The exposed QMC, 79 concrete slabs formed a stark, geometric pattern in the early light, now surrounded by yellow police tape and the bustling presence of federal agents, EPA officials, and documentary filmmakers who had arrived at dawn. Dr. Reyes, the EPA lead, had set up a makeshift command post under a pop-up canopy. She explained to Liam that the initial test confirmed significant groundwater contamination, proof that the remediated site had been leaking toxins for decades. "This is one of the most significant environmental crime scenes I've ever witnessed," she told him, her voice low. "And your testimony, along with Frank Weber's, is the linchpin." Sarah Jenkins' follow-up article, detailing the storm and the unearthing of the evidence, had gone viral. News networks picked up the story, and Veteran vs. Corwin became a national headline. Liam's phone buzzed incessantly with interview requests, but he deferred to Sarah, who acted as his unofficial press manager. The legal machinery began to grind into motion. By noon, a federal judge issued a temporary injunction, halting all of Evergrowth's operations in the state pending a full investigation. Corwin Industries' stock plummeted. The Department of Justice announced it was opening a criminal investigation into the company for conspiracy, environmental destruction, and perjury related to their past court testimonies. But the victory felt fragile. That afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up, and a woman in a sharp pantsuit introduced herself as Elena Vance, a lawyer from a firm representing Corwin Industries. She didn't approach the federal agents, instead making a beeline for Liam. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice smooth as ice, "my clients wish to avoid a protracted, messy legal battle. They are prepared to offer a substantial settlement, one that would set you up for life, in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and your agreement to recant your statements about the displacement camp. They acknowledge some minor environmental oversights, but the rest is fiction." The offer was a different kind of attack, more insidious than Miller's threats. It was an offer to make his financial worries vanish, to give him the comfortable anonymity he'd once craved. All it would cost was the truth. Ranger, sitting beside Liam, let out a soft whine, as if sensing the crossroads his owner faced. Liam looked from the lawyer's polished face to the muddy, truth-torn land, to the federal agents who were fighting to hold the powerful accountable. He thought of the ghostly faces in the satellite photos, the people who had no one left to speak for them. "Tell your clients," Liam said, his voice quiet but firm, "that somethings aren't for sale." Elena Vance's smile was thin and cold. "A shame. The legal process can be so draining. I do hope you have the stamina for it, Mr. Cole." She turned and walked back to her car. Dr. Reyes approached him after the lawyer left. "That was the right choice," she said. "But she's not wrong about the process. This will be a long fight. They have endless resources." As at the underscore point, Liam's phone rang. It was a number with a Washington, D.C. area code. A staffer from a congressional oversight committee was on the line, requesting his testimony for a hearing on military contractor accountability. The battle was expanding, moving from the muddy fields of Wyoming to the hallowed halls of power. The phone had barely cooled in his hand when it rang again, a number he never thought he'd see again. His former CO from the QMC 79 project, and his first words were, "Turner, you've stirred up a hornet's nest. You need to hear what really happened before you testify." The voice from his past held secrets that could change everything, but meeting him meant stepping back into a world of shadows and sworn silence, a risk Liam had to take. Major James Briggs, retired, had chosen a diner 60 miles from Dry Gulch, a place with sticky vinyl booths and coffee that tasted of burned tires. The air smelled of stale coffee and old grease. When Liam slid into the opposite seat, the man he'd once known as a hard-edged, confident officer looked diminished, his shoulders rounded and his eyes darting toward the door every time the bell jingled. "You look like hell, Cole," Briggs said by way of greeting, his voice a dry rasp. "You don't," Liam replied. The major still wore a pressed polo shirt, but the veneer control was cracked. Briggs stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking nervously against the mug. His eyes kept scanning the door and windows. "I saw the news. The slabs. The pipe." He took a sharp breath. "I knew it was only a matter of time after you bought that land. Knew it in my gut." "Then you know why I'm here," Liam said, his voice low. "You were there. What really happened in '89. Briggs's eyes glazed over, looking at a point far beyond the diner's foggy window. The official story was a pressure leak. The real story, it was a catastrophic design flaw. Corwin used substandard valves to cut costs. We knew it. My reports were flagged, then buried. The day it blew, it wasn't just water. It was a cocktail of chemicals they were testing, unapproved, unmonitored. Liam felt the air leave his lungs. It was worse than he'd imagined. The horror of that revelation settled heavily between them. "The camp," Briggs continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Zone 3B. It was a temporary settlement for displaced families from a nearby conflict. They were promised safety, clean water. Our system was their lifeline. When it failed, it didn't just leak. It flooded their encampment with contaminated, chemical-laden water. People got sick. Some died. Not from an explosion, from poisoning. The truth landed like a physical blow. It wasn't an accident they had covered up. It was a negligent homicide. The order came from far above me," Briggs said, his knuckles white where he gripped his mug. "Seal the site. Classify everything. Report as a contained structural failure. We were told it was to prevent public panic, to protect strategic interests. They gave us medals for the successful containment." He let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "I have lived with that medal in a box for 30 years. Why are you telling me this now?" Liam asked. "Because they're scrambling," Briggs said, leaning forward intently. "Corwin is preparing to throw every single person from our unit under the bus. They'll say we acted on our own, that we misinterpreted orders. They're building a case that we are the criminals. My pension, my reputation, it's all dust if that happens. But if I testify with you, if we go to committee together, we might have a chance." He slid a folded piece of paper across the sticky table. It was a list of names, 7 other soldiers from their unit, with phone numbers and last known addresses scribbled beside them. "They feel the same way I do. They're scared, but they're ready, if we all stand together." Liam took the list, the paper feeling heavy with the weight of redeemed consciences. This was no longer just his fight. It was a chance for a whole unit to finally, after decades, complete their mission to tell the truth. He looked at his former CO, a man broken by a secret he was finally ready to shed. "The congressional hearing is in 3 weeks," Liam said. "Will you be there?" Briggs held his gaze for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. "I'll be there." As Liam drove home, the list of names burning a hole in his pocket, his phone lit up with a call from Dr. Reyes. Her voice was tense, urgent. "Liam, get back here." Corwin's lawyers just filed a motion to seal the entire site as a national security matter. They're making their move, and we have less than 24 hours to stop them. With a federal injunction threatening to lock away the truth forever, Liam and his allies launched a desperate, all-night operation to document the evidence before the gates slammed shut. Liam didn't bother going home. He drove straight to the site, where he found Dr. Reyes and Sarah Jenkins in a heated discussion under the canopy, its sides whipping in the wind. The mood had shifted from purposeful to urgent. "They've invoked the state secret's privilege," Dr. Reyes said, her face grim. "A judge in D.C. is hearing their motion at 9 a.m. tomorrow. If it's granted, this site becomes a black box. No press, no EPA, no public. We lose everything." "We can't let that happen," Sarah stated, already pulling camera equipment from her car. "If we can get comprehensive, undeniable documentation into the public domain before that hearing, it becomes much harder for a judge to seal it. The court of public opinion will already be in session." A plan crystallized in the fading light. They would create a full digital record. Dr. Reyes and her team would take soil and water samples, recording the entire chain of custody on video. Sarah would photograph and film every exposed slab, every marking, every inch of the ruptured pipe. Liam, with his engineering knowledge, would provide a narration, explaining the significance of each piece of evidence directly to the camera. They worked through the night, illuminated by the glaring lights of the news vans and the federal team's powerful generators. The cold seeped into their bones, but no one stopped. Ranger patrolled the perimeter, a silent, watchful guardian. Liam walked Sarah through the site, his voice steady on camera. "This weld seam here," he said, pointing to a broken pipe. "That a military-grade seal, designed to be permanent. We were ordered to make it this way, to ensure nothing got in or out." He moved to the concrete slabs. "QMC 79. This was our unit. This stamp is on blueprints, on personnel files. It connects this dirt directly to the United States Army Corps of Engineers and to Corwin Industries." Meanwhile, Dr. Reyes meticulously documented the sampling process for the viewers. "We are taking samples from directly beside the stamped concrete and from the water flowing from the pipe," she explained to her own camera. "These will be split and sent to 3 independent, certified labs. The results will be published regardless of any judicial order." Sarah's photographer captured stunning, high-resolution images of the stenciled markings, the corrosive patterns on the pipe, and the vast, disturbed basin. They were creating an archive that no injunction could easily erase. As the sky began to lighten, the digital trove was complete. Hundreds of photos, hours of video testimony, and a legally documented collection of physical evidence. Sarah immediately began uploading the files to the Tribune's secure servers, with copies distributed to major news networks and the Congressional Committee. Exhausted, they gathered by the canopy as the sun broke over the hills. They had done all they could. "The hearing starts in 2 hours, Sarah said, sipping bitter coffee. "Our lead story is already online, with a link to the full evidence gallery. It's called the Dry Gulch Archive, evidence they tried to bury. It's out of our hands now." Liam looked at the scarred land, now bathed in the soft light of dawn. He felt a profound exhaustion, but also a sense of solidarity. He wasn't a lone veteran shouting into the wind anymore. He was part of a team. As they packed up, Liam's phone vibrated. The screen showed a single text from an unknown number. They're ruling early. The judge's decision was coming down now, and the fate of the truth hung in the balance. The judge's unexpected early ruling would either vindicate their all-night efforts or erase their evidence from public view. And as Liam watched the live stream, he knew the next 5 minutes would define this fight forever. Liam's hands were trembling as he fumbled with his phone, Pulling up the live news stream, Dr. Reyes, Sarah, and a handful of EPA staffers crowded around the small screen under the canopy. The scene was a federal courtroom in Washington, D.C. The judge, a stern-faced woman with silver hair, was already speaking, her voice clear and measured over the tinny speaker. The court has reviewed the motion to seal under the state secrets privilege, she began, her words methodical. The government and petitioner, Corwin Industries, have argued compellingly for national security concerns regarding certain military engineering specifications. Liam's heart sank. It was a language of concession. His face fell as she listed Corwin's arguments. However, the judge continued, pausing to look directly at the camera. The court must also weigh the profound public interest in matters of environmental safety and historical accountability. The evidence in question, specifically the photographic and video documentation, and the preliminary environmental sampling, has already entered the public domain in a significant way. On the split screen, the Corwin lawyer's face tightened. Liam felt a dawning hope. The genie, as they say, is out of the bottle, the judge stated flatly. To grant a seal at this juncture would be an exercise in futility that would serve only to undermine public trust in this institution without achieving its intended purpose. The motion to seal the site and all associated evidence is therefore denied. A wave of stunned silence washed over the group under the canopy, followed by a collective exhale. Sarah let out a triumphant yes. And Dr. Reyes clapped Liam on the shoulder, a rare, broad smile on her face. They had won. The evidence would remain public. The story could not be untold. Liam's face showed first shock, then relief. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, given the gravity of the allegations and the evidence already presented, this court strongly recommends the Attorney General's office expedite its criminal investigation into Corwin Industries. This case is adjourned. The live stream cut back to a shocked news anchor. Under the canopy, the mood was electric. The legal barrier they had feared most had been shattered. The truth had standing in a court of law. But the phone calls started almost immediately. The first was from a Congressional Oversight Committee, formally subpoenaing Liam and Major Briggs to testify in 2 weeks. The second was from a U.S. Attorney's Office, requesting a formal interview to build their criminal case. The victory in the courtroom had not ended the war. It had simply moved the battlefield to a new, more formal arena. As the team began to process the win, Liam felt the weight of what was to come. He was no longer just a source or a witness. He was a central figure in a national drama. Ranger leaned against him, sensing his shift in mood from relief to apprehension. Dr. Reyes's phone buzzed. She listened for a moment, her smile fading. Understood. We'll be ready. She hung up and turned to the group. That was the U.S. Marshal Service. With the seal denied and the criminal investigation accelerating, they're assigning protective details to key witnesses. They're concerned about intimidation tactics. The reality of their situation settled back over them. Corwin had lost a major legal battle, but a corporation that powerful would not go down without a fight. They had already proven they were willing to break the law. What would they do when cornered? As the protective details were being arranged, Liam's phone lit up with a call from Frank Weber, the former welder. His voice was frantic, panicked. Liam, they just came to my house. 2 men. They didn't do anything, just sat in a car out front and stared. They know where I live. They know about the testimony. The victory had just made the stakes more personal and more dangerous. The intimidation of Frank Weber revealed a terrifying new tactic, targeting the entire chain of witnesses. Now, Liam had to transform their isolated fears into a united front before the pressure made one of them break. Frank Weber's panic call changed everything. The victory in court hadn't stopped Corwin. It had made them more desperate. Liam immediately called Major Briggs. They're circling, just like I said they would, Briggs said, his voice grim. We can't let them pick us off one by one. We stand together or we fall apart. Within hours, a plan was formed. With the help of the U.S. Marshal Service, the 8 former unit members, Liam, Briggs, Weber, and 5 others on the list, were moved to a single, secure location, a repurposed fire watch tower on a forested ridge, loaned by a sympathetic landowner. It was Spartan but defensible, with a clear view of the single-access road. Rangers seemed to understand the gravity, patrolling the perimeter of the tower's base with a quiet intensity. That first night, as the 8 men sat around a makeshift table with maps and old photos, the decades of silence between them began to melt away. Frank Weber, his voice raw with 30 years of pent-up guilt, spoke first. "I welded the primary cap," he said, almost weeping. "The supervisor stood over me, said, 'Make it permanent, Frank,' like it never existed." Carlos Rivera, his tone sharp and angry, confessed next. "I falsified the pressure logs. They told me it was for operational security, but I knew we were hiding something." Another man, Tomas Vega, spoke in a flat, matter-of-fact voice that made his story even more chilling. "I drove the truck that delivered the substandard valves. When I asked why we weren't using the specs, they told me to shut up and drive." Each story was a piece of the puzzle, corroborating the others, building an unassailable narrative of corporate malfeasance and a military command structure that looked the other way. They weren't just witnesses. They were a brotherhood reforged by the truth. Their shared fear began to morph into a shared resolve. They spent the next 2 days rehearsing their testimonies, cross-checking dates and details, building the most powerful weapon they had, a consistent, corroborated account. Sarah Jenkins, granted limited access, documented the scene not for immediate publication, but as a historical record. "This is incredible," she whispered to Liam. "You've not only uncovered the crime, you've reunited the jury that can convict the perpetrators." On the eve of the congressional hearing, as the group was finalizing their statements, a package arrived by courier. It was addressed to the group collectively. Inside was a single, glossy photograph. It was a recent, high-resolution image of the fire watchtower, taken from a distance. There was no note, no threat. None were needed. The message was clear. Asterisk, we are watching. We know where you are. Asterisk. Instead of inciting panic, the photo solidified their determination. Major Briggs taped it to the wall. "Let them watch," he said, his voice steady for the first time in weeks. "Let them see us not hiding, but preparing. Let them see that we are not afraid." The group stood together, using the threat as fuel for their resolve, their growth as a unit now complete. That night, Liam stood on the tower's landing, looking out at the dark forest. Ranger leaned against him. He thought of the long, broken road that had led him from a dusty trailer to this ridge, surrounded by men who, like him, were finally ready to lay down their burden of silence. They were no longer victims of the past. They were architects of the future. As the sun rose on the day of the hearing, a fleet of black SUVs arrived to transport them to the airport. But as Liam climbed into the lead vehicle, his phone buzzed with an alert. A major news outlet was running a breaking story source from anonymous insiders, claiming the witnesses were unreliable, their memories corrupted by trauma and time. The final battle for the narrative had begun, and it would be fought on national television. As the witnesses faced a congressional committee, a last-minute smear campaign threatened to destroy their credibility, forcing them to rely on the one thing Corwin couldn't manipulate, the unshakable bond of their shared truth. The anonymous hit piece spread through media channels like poison. "Trauma-tainted testimony. Can we trust these veterans?" the headline screamed, quoting military psychologists and anonymous sources who questioned the reliability of the witnesses' memories. It was a classic disinformation tactic. Attack the messenger when you can't dispute the message. In the quiet holding room before the hearing, the 8 men read the articles on their phones. The air grew thick with tension. Frank Weber looked pale. "They're saying we're just broken old men imagining things." Major Briggs stood, his posture straightening into the officer he once was. "Look at each other," he commanded. "We are not broken. We are the only ones who were there. We have each other, and we have the truth. That's more than they have." When they filed into the congressional hearing room, the atmosphere was electric. Camera flashes popped. Liam's eyes met Sarah Jenkins in the press gallery. She gave him a firm, encouraging nod. Then he saw the Corwin lawyers at their table, their expression smug. The questioning began, hostile and leading. A congressman friendly to Corwin tried to pick apart their stories, highlighting minor discrepancies in dates and times, implying the decades had warped their memories. For a moment, The smear campaign seemed to be working. Then Carlos Rivera was asked about the pressure logs he falsified. "The date might be fuzzy, sir," Carlos said, his voice clear and strong. "But the order to change those numbers is burned into my mind. I see my commander's face every time I close my eyes." When Frank Weber was challenged, he didn't get defensive. He simply described the heat of the welding torch, the weight of the responsibility, and the exact words of his supervisor. "Make it permanent, Frank, like it never existed." His testimony was so visceral and specific that the room fell silent. Then it was Liam's turn. He didn't just speak about the pipes and the welding. He spoke about the silence that followed, the guilt that festered for 30 years, the faces in the satellite photos of the camp, and the dog who had led him to the truth when he was too lost to find it himself. He spoke not as a victim, but as a soldier finally completing his mission. "We were ordered to bury the truth," Liam concluded, his gaze sweeping across the committee members and the cameras. "But the land refused to keep it, and so do we." One by one, each man testified, their stories interlocking like a chain, each account reinforcing the next. The attempted smear campaign backfired spectacularly. Their raw, emotional consistency was far more powerful than any polished, lawyer-approved statement. By the end of the day, the outcome was clear. The committee chairwoman publicly commended their extraordinary courage and integrity. The Attorney General announced the indictment of Corwin Industries and several of its former executives on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and environmental crimes. In the weeks that followed, a historic settlement was reached. Corwin was forced to establish a massive cleanup fund and a restitution program for the families affected by the disaster. The land itself was designated a National Historic Site, with a memorial to the lives lost and a center dedicated to environmental restoration, to be overseen by a board that included Liam and Dr. Reyes. Liam chose to stay. He moved his trailer to a permanent site on the ridge overlooking the healing valley. He was no longer a homeless veteran, but a guardian of the truth he had helped unearth. Ranger, his side fully healed, spent his days roaming the now green fields, his job as protector finally complete. One evening, Liam stood with Ranger by the new memorial, a simple stone etched with the names of the lost. The wind carried the scent of clean earth and growing things. The weight he had carried for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet, hard-won peace. As the stars emerged, Liam felt a familiar nudge against his hand. Ranger looked up at him, then toward the horizon where the first lights of the new visitors' center twinkled in the dusk. Somewhere out there, another lost soul was searching for their way home, and this land was now a beacon, proving that even the deepest wounds can heal, and no truth stays buried forever. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.